Hello and welcome to the Fire in the Valley show. Today we're having myself, Mighty Pete, and we are joined here today by the Geralyn Gendreau. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Pete.
Fabulous name, first of all. I'm going to bring that straight up. So you're saying your name is French?
Yes, Gendreau is French. We don't make this beautiful DR sound in English, but yes, it's a French name.
Awesome. So listen, first of all, tell us, who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
Well, who am I? I'm Geralyn, and I live in California near San Francisco. I'm a publisher and psychotherapist, now turned author. I've been ghostwriting and editing books for 20 years, always for other people. And this is the first one that I am the sole author. And it's about my mentor of 15 years, who was an author herself. She was actually an Upper West Side Manhattan socialite, and she ran off to the Venezuelan jungle back in the 50s, long before anybody called it the rainforest. And she, after 5 trips to the Amazon, she didn't go as an anthropologist, she went as a diamond hunter. She went on a diamond hunting expedition with an Italian count and ended up writing a book called The Continuum Concept, which became a child rearing classic. It's really a treatise on human nature. And it had a huge impact. It's been translated into 20 languages. So, and it still sells 45 years later with no promotion whatsoever. Now, Gloria Steinem, who endorsed the book and was a friend of Jean's, she told me she still gives Jean's book to everybody who she knows who's having a baby. So that's the importance of Jean's work. If you've seen a woman with the baby in the sling on her hip, that started in the, it didn't start, it came into vogue after going, not being popular. Thank you, Queen Victoria, who invented the pram.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Put the baby, let him cry himself to sleep. Like, that's just all wrong in terms of our evolutionary expectations. So Jean started that baby wearing trend back in the 60s, when it became 70s rather, among the hippie generation. And that then spawned the attachment parenting movement, which has been huge and is now kind of being crafted a little differently, hopefully, with this work I'm doing with Scott Noel. Because although Jean's book was the original inspiration for the attachment parenting movement, there were a couple things that kind of got missed, that got dropped out in translation, that are very, very important. So I personally have not had children, but I am, so to answer your first question in a short, I'm the torchbearer for Jean Lidloff's work and starting a renaissance for her ideas, which are really about what we are as human beings. It's not just about child rearing, it's really about human nature and how to bring out the best in humanity.
Wow, that's not a small topic. That's pretty impressive now. What were you trying to get across in the book? What was the main theme, if you like?
Well, so the Continuum Concept was a difficult read for a lot of people. I devoured it in an afternoon, but Jean's from an earlier generation, long before there was such a thing, when tweet meant what a bird does. And she could write paragraph-long sentences. Now, in today's world, who follows paragraph-long sentences? You lose them after 2 lines. So, and it really is very philosophical. There's a lot of story in it. But this book reads like a novel. People pick it up and they're like, I couldn't put it down. I'm a professional writer and I put my heart and soul into it. So, and although I've written, in fact, I've only written and been published in nonfiction, my greatest love is fiction. So it reads like a novel. And so it gets Jean's message across in the context of this adventure story that really makes it land. Story is the most powerful teacher we have. And so it really is about giving birth to a renaissance for her ideas and bringing these things back to the forefront, because they've, in this day and age, many people have said to me, oh my God, I read that book 5 years ago and it changed my life. But it's not on everybody's mind and on their, in their conversations these days. So I'm hoping that it will come back and that some of the information that can really help parents will come through.
I mean, that is the obligation or the privilege, I suppose, of an author, is to put across a message. And you get into people's intimate thoughts, and you get to mix in with that, but also it happens while you sleep. It's a passive asset in many ways, right?
That's beautifully said. Yes. I'm not sure what you mean in the context of this. That happens while you sleep. It is something I work with authors as a writing coach. And I always tell them, when you get to the end of a sentence and you can't think of what to say yet, go to sleep. Because whatever problem, whatever wall you hit up against, in your sleep, your unconscious is going to provide you the next step. So don't worry, it's sometimes you just have to trust that that's what you've got to give it today. So, but what did you mean in the context that you asked the question?
No, I mean, once it's committed to paper, the sort of letters, words, symbols, etc., or eventually get to a page, get edited, and then it goes out into the outside world. At that point, you got to let it fly, and
Exactly.
people pick it up, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. They read it nonstop. They read it over 3 months, whatever it is. But it's there, and it's it's following its own little journey. It's like, let it tweet and let it fly. And
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And I often wonder when I'm going to sleep, like, I wonder who's reading it right now. I think about that, or in the morning, I'm like, who read it last night? What emails am I going to get from people? I love actually getting the emails from people saying, oh my God, I read it. Or I'm at the part where she got on the boat to go to Europe, like, oh my God, it only costs $150 to sail across. It's so interesting to hear from people, the little details that they pick up. So yes, it does live in, now I know what you meant. Like, yes, it's while I'm sleeping, the book is out there doing what it needs to do. So.
Wow. No, that's awesome. So tell us, before we sort of really get into it, really, I suppose, what does fire in the belly mean to you?
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I'm a fire sign, according to the Taoist priest I worked for a while as his editor. My first association when I saw the name of your podcast was with, is it Sam Keen who wrote the book, Fire in the Belly? There was a very popular book in the men's movement early on. And so that was my first association. But for me, I'm a martial artist. I trained in Taekwondo and Hapkido throughout my 20s. So I know about the Dantian, and I know about the fire in the belly is very literal for me. Like, I can feel it. And when I meditate, my attention goes to the Dantian behind the navel, where that solar plexus center is. So I don't have a conscious relationship with it like I did when I was training every day in the dojo, but there is something to be said for the organs as a source of energy. And I focus a lot on building energy. I'm in my 60s. And it's amazing how, I go to bed 10:30 every night. By 10:30, I start to wind down at 9:15, 9:30, because I don't have the energy to go all night long like I used to. But there is ways to cultivate your energy. And some of it is that fire in the belly, like to have the fire, to have the mitochondria. I've been focused for many years now, as have a lot of people in the health and nutrition arena, into building the mitochondria. Now, that's a whole other conversation. But since you asked about fire in the belly, there is something about the prana, the building of prana within the body, that allows us to do more in the world. So that's what it means to me.
Have you always had that in your life? Is it something that comes and goes, for you, that sort of, that passion, that fire in the belly, as you say?
Well, it's funny. A woman who was like one of my mom's best friends when I was a little one, they were both having babies at the same time. She said, I had never saw a baby like you. You just had this energy, And I'm often told that people are like, wow, your energy is huge or whatever. And I'm only 5'2". So it's like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. But I know I do have, there's something, partly it's because of the near-death experience I had. But when she told me that was when I was an infant. It's like, okay, apparently some of us come in with a whole huge whatever, and maybe everybody has access to it, but their early life experiences dim that light. I'm not exactly sure, but that's the only clue that I would, and I've always been fiery. I mean, I have 3 brothers, and both of my parents, 40 years apart. My dad died 40 years ago. Before he died, and recently my mother said to me, you were more trouble to us than all 3 of our sons combined. I'm like,
Pride moment.
okay. Part of me is like, yes, I did my job. And the other, it's just very interesting. I do have a lot of energy. And, now I'm 60 and it's like, oh, I wish I had more. I wish I had more of that youthful energy, but it is one of those things. Sleep is the most important thing. If I don't get a good night's sleep, sleep is so important. I think it's even more important than what we eat, is getting good sleep.
I'm with you. Having 3 young kids, believe me, it's. I used to be an insomniac, but it's like, yeah, just bring some kids into your life, and believe me, that'll knock the insomnia right out of you, because you'll take any sleep you can get. So tell me, what's your earliest conscious memory?
This is interesting. I plumbed that for years. I mean, as a psychotherapist with some psychodynamic background, I was always interested about that. In Jungle Gene, there is a subplot about, I call it the blind spot. And I believe that our earliest memories are often linked to the formation of the negative ego or the defensive structure that almost everybody I know has. Interestingly, these indigenous people Gene lived with in the 50s and 60s. Well, I wasn't there, so I can't tell whether they had a defensive structure or not, but everybody I know does. And I think it links to that. So my very first memory, I think I was 3 or 4, and it was just of being out in the yard next to my house on a sidewalk with the ivy around it. Like, why would a person remember that? The thing about our earliest memories is so all the information is deep in the recesses of the brain, but what we actually remember they get memory tagged during sleep. Actually, these memory tags occur during sleep, but it's always when it's something that stands out as completely different than anything you've ever experienced before. That's what tags it for long-term memory. So I'm like, well, what is it about that experience that was so different? And that inquiry throughout graduate school, throughout all the years I was trying to figure myself out. I mean, most of us go into psychology because we're trying to figure ourselves out. Guilty as charged. So I didn't manage to figure it out in graduate school. It was when I got a hold of Gene's book that I started to figure out like how I tick and why. But so my experience, I did some very, very deep work that informed what I call the blind spot work that I do with my clients. And it really is to go back to find your way back to that actual moment in time, which isn't easy to do. It's not about regression. It's really about coming into the full presence of whatever occurred in that moment. And I won't tell you what occurred for me. You have to read the book. But I'll just give you an example of why those things happen. My ex had his earliest memory was he lived in San Francisco as a kid. And his earliest memory was when his mom sent him downstairs to buy a loaf of bread because there was a little corner store below. Now, why would someone remember that? Because it had never happened before. All of a sudden, mommy is sending me to get bread. Like that is I always say it's like first the fish is in the bowl and then the fish gets thrown up out of water. And it's like, wow, there's something other than water, and then plump back down in the water. So that memory stands out. And it's because she had just had a baby and she couldn't go down to the store. So she gave him, it was probably 40 cents for a loaf of bread back then. We're talking long, long time ago. So that's the thing about early memories is they usually there's some marker moment in our lives where things are fundamentally different than they have ever been before for us. And for a lot of people, it's something traumatic, or like getting a loaf of bread isn't something traumatic. So it's not always that our earliest memories are traumatic. They're just notable in some way for our consciousness and our psyche. Now, Jean had memory from her very, very earliest moments out of the womb, which is really unusual. Most people's earliest memories are somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. But it's anybody's guess why some people remember so early on.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, tell me this, where do you sit in terms of, have you been here before, do you think? Are we here multiple times? What's your take on this?
Oh boy, I try not to form an opinion about stuff that I don't have direct experience of, and I don't have direct experience of past lives. I have heard, in fact, I was just listening to something the other day I don't remember what it was, but they say there's evidence of past lives, like people come in and they died a certain way and they have a scar on their body, or, they look back at this. So there is some evidence. At this point, I'm reserving judgment. My preferred storyline is that in the collective unconscious, everybody has experienced everything, and that you can actually tap into past lives of anybody and everybody, like if there's a reason to, like if we are all in this all one consciousness where the whole thing is evolving at once and we individuate and then we go back to the one, all that kind of fabled new agey kind of stuff that is actually rooted in very ancient old age information. It's the best I can think about it. I reserve judgment on a lot of things because when I see people who have a strong opinion and they're sure they're just give me the creeps. Like, I don't know. I just want to stay curious. Like I'm open and I like to look at things and say, well, what if not that? What else would explain this? And this whole thing with COVID is this to vax or not vax is tearing families apart. And there's two very opposite stories about what's going on. So what do you believe? For me, it's like you just have to follow your heart and listen to your gut. Like try not to just follow the crowd, but there are two big crowds, there are two big crowds moving across the globe about what's really going on. Who has the true story? I'm not sure we can know. I'm not sure I want to know.
Yeah.
Or could even grok it, but the certitude with which people are, and of course I don't really want to go down the COVID pathway, but whenever you're talking fear is the deepest, most primal motivator. So it's understandable actually that it would be polarized because people are really afraid. Both sides are really, really afraid.
Yeah.
So it's pretty strange, but let's focus on something else. Hopefully that won't be a timely topic a year from now.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it goes back to whatever. But yeah, no, absolutely. I find that it's fascinating that there. But tell me, what was mini Geralyn like? What was the mini version of you?
Mini version of me. Well, my mom told me this story. So recently with COVID, I lived with my 90-year-old mother for a year. I happened to be at her house in Southern California when the lockdown hit. And I have three brothers, and we all decided it would be good for me to stay. In the early days, the older people weren't even supposed to go to the grocery store. So I stayed and stayed. I fell in love with the beach again. I grew up down there, and we have the San Francisco Bay here in the Bay Area, but it's redwood trees and an hour and a half drive to get to a real beach. So I had the deep pleasure of actually living with my mom, who gets to do that at my age, and discover a person, discover someone that you actually really like. It was so beautiful. I have this deep love for my mother right now. In fact, last night she called me really upset, and it felt like the roles were reversed. Like I talked her down and I did the problem solving, it was really funny. But anyway, back to your question, she told me, that was all a lead in to what she told me recently. She said, yeah, when you were 4 years old, you ran away from home. And, you took your little bag and you went down the street, and then you came back 10 minutes later and you said, I forgot my money. I didn't have any money, but, I forgot my money. So I think I was always of my own mind, like there was a way that I wasn't having it. And, I come from a very strict Catholic family. So was church on Sunday and Catholic school. And my mom's friends used to say, your children are so well behaved. And I was like, yeah, well, we were just terrified. It's like, don't do anything. But she has it. And I understand that more. Again, from having lived with her, it's like, I see, talk about fire in the belly. Oh my God. I would just see her and go, oh my God, now I know where I get it, because she's super fiery, 90 years old, and she'll be giving customer service reps a hard time. Or, when the guy doesn't come to fix her stove at the time that he promised, she's like, I've got things to do. And I'm like, yeah, watch Judge Judy. Like, what do you have to do other than clean your house compulsively, Mom? But she's very, very fiery. So yeah, I mean, I'm my mother's daughter, and I'm also the sister to 3 boys. So that was very formative for me. I was really, really a tomboy. We lived in Connecticut for 2 years. My father was with IBM, and they move you around. The joke is, I've been moved. IBM means I've been moved. And so we moved to the East Coast at one point, and the Stanford Advocate got wind of the fact that 3 boys lived in our house, and they came to see if one of them wanted a paper route. Guess who took the paper route? I'm like, I'll do it. $4 a week. That was a lot of money back in that was a lot of money back in the early 70s for a 10, 12-year-old.
So where do you fall in the sibling order then? Are you?
I'm number 2. I have one older brother and 2 younger. We're the classic, there's that family thing. It's like my brother's the hero, I'm the rebel, the next one's the lost child, and my youngest brother is definitely the mascot. No question about it. He's kind of everybody's favorite. He has this rock solid self-esteem because he had the 3 of us, looking at him all the time. We called him, what was his nickname? We all had nicknames. His was Toot, Little Toot. Because he would like, God, it's so funny. Where did that come from? Oh, trains. Oh, toot toot, for the train. And he would try to say my name. I guess one time I was afraid when I heard a fire engine something, and I would be like, and I was like scared. And so he used to, my name, Geralyn, he called me Nornien. And so he would try to scare me. He'd go, Nornien. He'd make these fire engine noises. So anyway, being the sister to 3 brothers, I think, was very formative. My friends who have all sisters have a very different relationship. I mean, it's just a completely different thing to have all sisters. One of my best friends from high school has 3 sisters. I had 3 brothers. That is so formative, in terms of I have more men friends than women friends. I was actually reflecting this morning that I'm probably 10 or 15 podcasts now, all men. I have yet to be interviewed by a woman. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about.
That is interesting, because probably about 75% of my guests would be female.
Oh, really? Huh.
So maybe they're just doing, they're not hosting, they're just doing all the guest routes.
I wonder what that's about. Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of female hot podcast hosts. I do have some scheduled, but so far it's been all men. I'm pretty sure. Oh no, there was one woman. So anyway.
Yeah. Who do you prefer to work with out of interest, men or women?
I think in general, I do better with men. Yeah. Especially men who have a backbone.
Yeah.
I'm biting my tongue now not to say more about that. It's like,
well, imagine when you probably had to fight your corner. It's like, yeah, you don't want someone that's going to be a pushover. You need a bit of resistance, right?
It's funny. My one longest term relationship, the man, he didn't have a backbone, and it's kind of what brought our relationship to a halt repeatedly. And for me, relationships should keep moving always, but there was a way that I began to realize that my fire was a bit too much for him. I did learn to dial it back. I think one of the most powerful lessons I learned in that relationship was how not to do what my mom does and blow up. For me, like my mom, it's like I get angry and then I'm over it. It's like it's gone, then I'm back to normal and all's good. But I'd lose him. So I got to the point where it was like, okay, there was a moment of choice. Like, okay, I can blast him and lose my man for 2 days, or I can walk outside and scream at the trees, or what. So I began to really see the impact of my temper flares, which for me, they're just a flare. It's not a forest fire, it's a flare. It means something's going on here, you know? So it was interesting to be able to dial that back a bit. But then I digress. I don't even remember your question.
All right. It's all right. Neither do I. So we're all good on that score. What was the original plan then? What were you going to do when you grew up?
You know, I always wanted to be a teacher. I think in high school, I always thought I wanted to be a teacher. Then I went to Oregon State my first 2 years of school and studied political science, which didn't agree with me. When I went back to school, I was still unsure what I wanted to do. And my father said, you have the gift of gab. He said, communication is the most important thing. If you can write and speak well, you'll do fine no matter what you decide to do. So I finished my undergrad in communications, and it served me well. I really do feel that the structure of logic and thought is what makes me a good ghostwriter and editor. I'm always so surprised when people don't know the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument. It's like, I know intrinsically the difference. So I have a really strong bullshit detector. And often with my authors, I'm like, okay, so do you know the difference?
No, you're going to have to break it down because I'm sitting here wondering.
So a valid argument, the conclusion proceeds from the premises.
Okay.
Let me see if I can give you there's a really good example. I always forget it. It's hang on. I'm going to just do a quick little. Don't ask me why I can't retain this. I always go look it up. Okay, so here's two examples. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is immortal. So the conclusion follows from the premises. When the conclusion follows from the premises and the premises are true, it's a sound argument. So that's a sound argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is immortal. Now, when the premises are not true, the conclusion follows from the premises, you have a valid argument, but it's not sound. For example, all birds can fly. Penguins are birds. Therefore, penguins can fly. So, and this is the problem in our world. This is where what we were talking about earlier, like no one really knows. People make an argument that's valid, whether it's about reincarnation or COVID. It's like conclusion follows from your premise. Are your premises true? And when we're dealing in unknowns, it's hard to say what is absolute truth. I don't know that there's any absolute truth other than everything is always changing. So that's the problem I have with when people say, well, I trust the science. I'm like, okay, you trust the science. Have you heard of researchers' bias? Which science are you going to trust? There's science to prove everything that people are asserting right now is the absolute truth and on which they base their choices. But so it's a challenging thing to put these considerations before someone's thought process and challenge their thought process and ask them to think more deeply. We're not good at critical thinking, unfortunately. And I think critical thinking is something much needed in our world.
There's versions of truths, isn't it? You know, versions of beliefs and versions of whatever we're told we grew up with, etc.
Well, that's the distinction. You just named the key distinction. Is this your belief or is this objective truth? And objective truth in many cases is a moving target. You know, they still can't define energy or consciousness. Even water, they can't actually say exactly what it is. So it's all very, very interesting but we crave certainty. You know, that's how we deal with our discomfort and not knowing is we want certainty. It's part of how the mind works.
How do you feel about that sort of openness, that sort of, you know, life's a big dough ball? You know, it's all
a big dough ball. I love that. You know, I'm atypical in that sense because of I've lived a very unconventional life, and I don't have a lot of the securities a lot of people have. Um, I'm not I'm not attached to a home or a relationship. I'm pretty much I mean, I'm one of the original digital nomads before they called it that. I have never owned a home. I have no interest in owning a home. I've never been married. I've never had children. And part of that is just that I'm a wild and crazy beast who refuses to be poured into a glass. But I have had a successful career. I've been writing books for 20 years. And if anything grounds me, it's this computer. It's like, I know where my computer is. And ever since I first had a laptop, it was like, wow, this is freeing. I can work from wherever I am. I can just pick up this little puppy. I mean, now I have the big Mac and the Mac Air, but I did want to address your question. Oh, so one of the things that I think liberated me from the conventional view of the world was a near-death experience that put me in very direct contact with what I'll call the unseen realms. Like there is something behind that. There's this Wizard of Oz back there. There's something that we're not aware of from where we're looking, that our senses can't actually perceive, that is a vast intelligence kind of holding all of it, even in the midst of the chaos and craziness of 2020 and 2021. There is some vast intelligence behind it all. And it doesn't mean the individual life is going to be spared or easy or anything, but the more attached we are to how we think it's supposed to be, the less aliveness we're able to tap into. There is a story I like to read from the book that really addresses this issue of how are we conditioned to be unhappy? And I think my true north is always, and it did come largely out of not so much my reading Jean's work as my writing her biography and really drilling down deep into what is it that was so different about these people, these indigenous people living in the jungle in the 50s and 60s and over, I won't say eons, but these people never left paradise. Basically, they lived in a state of blessed good cheer. They dealt with life difficulties with a spirited attitude of celebration. Now, and in one of the editions, her book was published. She had 20 different publishers, 21 languages, something like 17 printings, and 3 editions to the book. And one of them, the subtitle was "In Search of Happiness Lost." So like, how did we, which has rings of, paradise lost. So how did we leave paradise? She preferred the title "Allowing Human Nature to Work Successfully," which is more accurate and less romantic. But let me read you. So I lost my train of thought and I don't know what the question was, but it was something to the effect of, why did I go off on that? Who cares? We'll just move forward instead of going back.
So one continuous flow, right?
Right. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I like to look in the PDF. It's easier to find things in the PDF version of this book than in the actual book. Let me see. Open recent. Here we go. It's 7 a.m. here, which is why I'm not as organized as I like to be. Can I read you this little?
Please do.
Okay. So this speaks to this idea. One of the memes I'm kind of sending out there in the world from this book is that joy is our natural state. And this really speaks to that. And I like to share the story because stories are such a powerful teacher. And as soon as you hear a story like this, it's almost like you can't fool yourself anymore. that what you think is real in your mind is the absolute unchangeable truth. So you get to see reality from a slightly different perspective. And that's why I like to share this story. So this is on her first expedition in 1951, and they're going upriver. It's about 3 weeks upriver to get to where they were headed, which is the Sanama village. And they're with the Tarapin guides. So Enrico Middleton is an Italian count, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Italian count, and Beth Orlando is his financier on the expedition. And Jean managed to convince him to take her along. Enrico, she wasn't romantically involved with him. She simply really, really wanted to go to the jungle and managed to convince him to take. She's a very persuasive individual. So, okay, so here we go. One day, without warning, the river halved in volume. They were surrounded by a dense growth of asparagus, ficus, and philodendron. Enrico recognized this passage. He had traversed it before, and he began to describe the challenge that lay ahead in detail. We'll have to climb over the steep granite wall next to Arapuchi Falls, he said. How steep? Jean asked. Quite, Enrico replied, avoiding her eyes. This is the passage you told me about, Beppe frowned nervously. Yes, Enrico replied. Then with a single slow nod of his head, this is the one. Still avoiding Jean's gaze, he went on. They placed logs across the path of the canoe and haul it inch by inch. The sun is merciless. You could easily get heat stroke. He described the pain he'd experienced time and again when the canoe would slip into a crevice between boulders and pivot out of control, scraping his shins and ankles against the granite. Jean's face remained stoic. Beppe looked horrified. Fearing what lay ahead, the three of them spent several days bracing themselves for the hard work and pain that was sure to follow. They arrived at the waterfall full of dread and primed to suffer, already hating every moment of the portage. They started off grim-faced, dragging the canoe up a rocky slope. When the canoe swung sideways, the sheer weight of it would pin a member of the work party to a burning rock while the others scrambled to move it off. A quarter of the way up, all ankles were bleeding. By way of begging off for a bit, Jean jumped ahead to photograph the scene. She climbed up 10 yards and perched high on a rock. From that vantage point, a distance from the action, she noticed a curious fact. There before her was a group of men engaged in a single shared task. Two of them were tense, frowning, losing their tempers at everything and everyone, cursing in the distinctive way of Tuscan men. The Tarapin guides, on the other hand, were having a fine time of it. They were laughing at the unwieldy canoe and making a game of the battle with gravity and rock. Between pushes, they showed off their scrapes and bruises. When once again, the canoe would wobble forward, pin one, then another of them underneath it, they responded with amusement rather than upset. The fellow who was held barebacked against the scorching granite invariably laughed the loudest once he could breathe again. All the men were doing the same work. All were experiencing strain and pain. All were sweating in the blazing hot sun. There was no difference in their situations except one. Jean and the Italians had been conditioned by their culture to believe that such a combination of circumstances was at the very bottom of the scale of well-being. What's more, they were quite unaware they had a choice, any other option, as to how they could experience that situation. The guides were equally unaware of their choice. These supposedly primitive people had also been conditioned to deal with their circumstances in a particular way. They knew what lay ahead, but hadn't spent the days before the trek wallowing in dread. Quite the contrary, they approached the portage in a perfectly merry mood. They seemed to revel in the camaraderie. Each forward move of the canoe was viewed as a victory, a cause for celebration.
It's beautiful. Just it's so picturesque as words, you know, so you can really sort of transporting.
Yeah. And it really, I mean, what a stark contrast. You know, we would just experience that as a horrible, awful thing. I mean, the way this translates in my life, I'm kind of a gym rat. I love to go to the gym and push heavy objects around. And a lot of people just dread it. For me, it's like, I'm going into my playground. I don't go in there with a list of exercises I'm supposed to do. And I don't like count 10 and then breathe for a minute. And then I just go in there like it's play. To me, it's like my sandbox. I never know what I'm going to do till I get there. I know how to use the equipment so I just go in and play. Now, I'm not so good at bringing that attitude to doing graphics in Canva, but I'm working on it.
Hey, listen, we've all got to have our skill set, right? You know, do you know what? It really strikes across there, you know, as you say that it is that, it's that flipping of that switch, you know, it's saying, you know, whereas I want to, or I get to, you know, I get to go to
Yes,
the gym,
yes,
fantastic, right? Or I want to go to the gym. It's like, well, yeah, want's also an instruction that leaves you
yes,
wanting.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and that's quite something to have that. I mean, what I was getting there is a lot of perception. You know, it's the same event, right? It's the same opportunity, it's the same waterfall per se, but yet for one it's a challenge, it's fun. It's the other, you know, and the other, it's this massive hurdle and nuisance.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just a whole different frame of reference. It's like their perceptual systems are attuned to how to say it, the celebration of it and the camaraderie. Like their focus is on we're in this together, rather than it's us against these rocks. You know, like why do I have to do this? This whole attitude. And certainly when it comes to, like, I have to deal with some Excel sheets in my world, and I cannot bring that attitude. But like you said about the people producing your show,
Hmm.
I have somebody, I call her, I'm like, can we get on and do this Excel sheet? And I just say the numbers. I just tell her what to, because those little boxes, like my brain does not work that way. I like words. I don't like numbers. I don't like boxes. Give me a blank canvas any day of the week. But I think that's also the beauty of being in a community and having the kind of support that is available for things. Like you got to give it to the people that enjoy it. Something I hate to do, somebody else. Lori loves it. My Excel girl, she's like, yeah, let me have at it. You know, it's very satisfying for her. I think she's crazy. But when she needs something written, I'm her go-to. So it's like sharing the weight of everything. And certainly in a tribal culture, that's built into it, which is the tragedy of
Hmm.
reading the continuum concept and trying to apply it in modern life. I mean, you know this far better than I was never a parent. I deeply honor anyone who's raising children in today's world, especially with the complexities that COVID has wrought on our society. So
Did you seek that non-conformity, or is that just the way it happened?
I think it's just the way it happened. I mean, I was always a bit rebellious.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you know
I
why?
suspect why.
Hmm.
I think it was probably, if I had to make up a reason, I'm not sure there's a reason. I'm not sure that it isn't kind of I mean, I don't put a lot of credence in destiny, but it does explain some things. I'll tell you a story about a Vedanta scholar who showed me that very clearly. But first, let me just say that I think some part of me, I was pushing against my parents who were quite strict, my mother especially. I think I had to break out of what felt to me like too constricted a reality from early on, because I was always very rebellious. I just had a rebellious streak. And who knows, if I'd had a permissive hippie chick mom, you know, if I'd been raised by a mom who went to Woodstock, it would have been very different. But I was a little too early for that. You know, Woodstock didn't happen until I was 11 or 12. So, you know, my mom was more the early 50s housewife, you know, wearing a dress around every day and putting her hair in curlers before she, you know, my husband. Anyway, it was a very, very different world. And probably I just felt too constrained by it. That's my guess.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating to think about different ways, isn't it? Well, where do we find you in flow? Where's your sort of place of greatest creativity then?
You know, I love that because it is what I do a program called the Author's Chrysalis for people who want to write their book.
Mm.
And what I really basically teach them is how to get into creative flow and how to tap into that and consistently find yourself in flow. And that's when, I mean, I have whole chapters that write themselves. It's like I'll sit down, there's this one piece, the most like best example of it is the opening chapter to a novel I'm writing. I've been writing it for years. I started it after my near-death experience when I needed to kind of translate this massive experience into something I could get my hands on. But the waking up in the morning and just sitting down and it floods, it just comes through. There's nothing so satisfying to me. And it doesn't happen every day. And sometimes it's a matter of being patient. But the unconscious is always working on whatever it is that we want to create. And when you show up consistently, it has a place to flow through. So even though I am this like delta, like I'm spreading across the delta all the time, going in all directions, I know the value of riverbanks. So it's like building in structure. Even though I'm in motion a lot, I move about a lot, there are these certain riverbanks, and that's like the disciplines. That's what I went in meditating in the morning, setting things up so I don't forget. Don't remember. It's like there's something about creating structure that makes it possible for the flow to come. And that's really what I encourage people to do. And creating a context for them where they can do that with accountability is, and then the consistency. That's what allows the flow and the creativity to come. So one of my favorite books that I always, whenever I'm starting to work with somebody, is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Fabulous book, a quick little short read, but it really, really talks about creative flow, getting through your blocks. That's like one of my Bibles.
Oh, wow. And for you, does creativity always come from the subconscious side, your deeper consciousness?
Well, it's the marriage between it. It's the intersection between the conscious and the unconscious mind. Like my conscious mind needs to know where I am in a story, and what the next scene is. The way I started Jungle Gene, I started literally with a piece of paper with all the scenes I knew needed to be included. That was the starting point. One piece of paper and a list. I still have it in this computer somewhere. And then from there, it's like, so the conscious part is like me following I have a really strong relationship with my Dantian, like I get nudged and I just go. I kind of feel my way through my reality. Follow your gut is very literal for me. But there's a way that having that piece of paper with those things written down on it, that's a starting point. So this is a funny one. So a couple of years ago, my iPhone was old enough that it had a little snafu, a big snafu, in that I could ask for, I would ask the navigator to take me somewhere, and it could show me where I was going, but it couldn't find where I was at the moment. So I'm in Portland, where I'm not familiar with the territory. I can get anywhere in San Francisco or Southern California, Santa Barbara, the places I am, right? Marin County. Drive there, blindfolded. But in Portland's weird the way it's laid out. It makes no sense. So it'd be like, okay, you need to, but it didn't know where I was. So that's problematic, and it really showed me that if you don't know where you are, you can't figure out it. You can see where you're going, but if you don't know where you are, you can't get there. So there is something about that I think is very, very powerful.
Has everyone got a book in them, do you think?
No. I think everybody has a beautiful story in them. Some people's stories are beautiful and boring. But I think I'll just say no to that question. I don't think everybody has a book in them. I think a lot of people think they do. And they like the idea of writing a book. Apparently being an author is right up there with being a neurosurgeon as the most admired, I don't know what to call it, vocation, career. People are like really wow. However, with the advent of Amazon and CreateSpace and self-publishing, anybody can call themselves an author if they have $300 in an afternoon to throw something up on Amazon. Kindle, KDP, Doesn't even cost you $300. You can write something, put it in a PDF, slap together a cover, load it on KDP, and put a price tag on it, and you'll be on Amazon the next day. And you can say, I'm an author. Now, is that something anybody wants to read? Is that something you're going to be proud of 5 years from now, when your kids read it? Probably not. This book took me 10 years, and I'm a professional writer. But I wanted to, it's a masterpiece, I have to say, if I do say so myself. It is a masterpiece. Everybody that's read it has just been like, oh my God, that was amazing. So no, I don't think everybody has a book in them. But
Yeah.
I think that the people, so when I talk to people, not so much anymore, but I'd get calls from people who are like, I hear you can help me write a book. I would spend my first introductory session with them trying to talk them out of it. Like, okay, here's a reality check. You're not going to get famous. You're not going to be on Oprah. Your chances are 1 in a million of that happening. And then when we finished the conversation, if they still wanted to write a book, I'm like, okay, good. You're probably an author. If I haven't talked you out of it, then you have the passion and the conviction required, because it's not going to be easy. It can be made easier. It can be made exhilarating. For me, it's an exhilarating experience when I've got an idea and it's brewing in my head. Can I read you an example? Oh my God.
Please do.
This was so fun. This was one of the most fun, quick flows that ever. So there were any number of places in the book at the end, during the final edit, that had to be cleaned up. So there were references to things that really, in today's age and let me see if I can get my mouth to work. There were any number of references that needed to be, well, they call it a sensitivity read, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the gender stuff. It's like, you got to be careful what you say sometimes. And there were a couple references. Jean wrote this book in the 70s, and there were some references that just needed to be, let's say, sanded down so as not to be so rough and splintery. One of them had to do with a scene where she's on the Pettus Bridge in when the Martin Luther King marches and all that. So you have to be careful these days how you phrase things. And it's true too of Indigenous people and all of that. So there is this stereotype about the caveman dragging the woman along, behind him, that old stereotype. So in one of her journals, she had written something about that. And I just didn't want to change it. It was like, that was one I couldn't change it. I'm like, no, that's funny. No, other people will think it's stereotypical, you can't say that. And I'm like, I just puzzled over it the longest time. There were a couple things like that I just put my foot down and I said, I don't care if they come after me. The woke wolves can go for my throat. I don't care. This is going in the book. And this was one instance. So what I'm going to read you is the footnote, but I'm going to read you the paragraph that it's in for context. And the point is, this came through in a flow state. And it was one of those things, like, I had to get to the computer because it was coming. And if I didn't write it down, I would have lost it. So here's the paragraph that it's in. On earlier trips, Jean had found the sexual customs among the Yakwana quite strange, at times offensive. But on this trip, she no longer felt shocked when a hunter would come home and grab his wife. Yes, by the hair, she would joke, mocking the stereotype. Footnote 33. The cartoon version of a caveman grabbing a woman by her hair and dragging her along the ground behind him is just that, a cartoon, not to be confused with the highly erotic, primal experience of having a strong set of fingers go up the back of one's neck, spread out and gently massage one's head before those fingers slowly tighten into a half fist, then firmly pull one's hair and take subtle consensual control in the manner of the greatest lovers of all time.
That's like a 2 fingers up to political correctness, right?
I mean, it was like so beautiful for me. The experience was, I've been puzzling over this and puzzling over it. And then I got like the scent. I'm like, oh, that's the solution. Okay. And it's coming, it's forming in my mind, and it's like crashing in on me, like this cascade coming over my head. I literally had to get to the computer to catch it before it, and that's another thing I teach my writers is like, never, ever, ever not have a capture device, either a notebook, your phone. Don't think, if you're falling asleep and you get a great idea, or the phrasing for something comes through, or the name, or even if you're doing email marketing and you suddenly get a perfect subject line, don't think you're going to remember it in the morning, because you're not. When I've lost too many good ideas by not rolling over, opening my phone, hitting the record button, because you think, oh, that's too good, I'll never forget that. You will. Particularly if you're falling asleep, because you're in that hypnagogic state between your conscious and your unconscious, and you got to capture it. That's really, really important.
I'm getting a sense of a bit of a theme here. It's like, that's the point, and we're not letting it go. We'll explain it out, so that nobody can misinterpret. But it's a bit like your men. It's kind of going, stand by your principles, stand by your thing, and it's like, talk it out if you have to, but for God's sake, don't just give in. Is that
Yeah.
I know it's a bit of a big wrapper I've just thrown around it all, but
oh, you mean going back to the issue of backbone?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's that sort of saying what you think, right? Because we go back to primals. Like, if you want to club it over the head, club it over the head. Don't sort of dance around the hat. Does that make sense?
Well, that's, I mean, mapping it onto the early conversation. Yes, for me, it's like so much easier to just call it, and then, like, if I have to tiptoe around and be politically correct every time I see something off, it slows things down. This whole thing about everything has to be done by consensus, and there are certain communities that are formed around those principles, that nothing ever gets done because everybody's being so careful to. But there's like a fine line. There are times when I'm on fire and I'm writing an email, and I'm like, if I hit the send button, this is going to cause more trouble. So this is for me, like, this version of this email is for me, put it in the drafts file, look at it again tomorrow morning. And there are times when it's really a judgment call, and everybody makes mistakes. It's like easy to flub it up. One of my teachers says, it's as important how you do the repair. When there's a rupture in a relationship, it's important to know how to repair. Same thing when you get dysregulated. That's a neurological thing. If you get dysregulated, you have to know how to regulate yourself and your partner. I mean, that's a key skill. So all of these things, I mean, being human is messy. Let's face it, it's a mess. For me, though, to have now Bob, my partner of many, he has now passed, but he, so the backbone thing with him, I think that all men, particularly, and this comes back to the fire in the belly and the Sam Keen and the whole men's movement, there are a few things that develop backbone for men. And Bob didn't have any of them. So those things, as far as I can tell, are having an abusive father will really give a kid a backbone, because there's a moment in not every young boy's life, but the young men who are abused by their father, there often comes a point in time when the son gets his strength and he is going to flatten him. And that puts an end to it. The first time the son stands up and says no, and either he's taller than his dad or whatever, but the first time it's like, that develops backbone. Military service develops backbone. Athletics will develop backbone. It's not like natural, it's a characterological thing. It's built. It's that whole thing of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You pound the steel is what makes it so solid. So if a man didn't have some of that stuff, he doesn't necessarily develop it. And Bob was absolutely brilliant, but all the sports he did were not competitive sports. He was a windsurfer and a surfer, and it was all about being in the flow for him. It was never about the fight, and he didn't go into military service. He actually made a choice when his number came up to, he told them he was gay because that was a way to get out of military service. So he didn't have any of those formative experiences. For me, it was martial arts. Martial arts will give you a backbone. Not that I needed any, I probably had enough from my childhood, but anyway, that's a long segue there, but.
No, it is fascinating. And are you typically pain or pleasure driven? What way do you, what motivates you?
I'm very much pleasure driven, and I avoid pain at all. Every opportunity. I want to write a book called The Pleasure Body. I don't know if you're familiar with Eckhart Tolle, but he talked a lot about the pain body. And I was like, okay, well, what about the pleasure body? Don't we also have a pleasure body? I mean, I have a whole series of books called the Naughty Girl Guides. And the first one is called The Naughty Girl's Guide to Sane Eating and Food Freedom. Get down to your happy weight and stay there. And it's really, I have struggled with weight like many, 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 many women throughout my life. And when I put myself on a rigid diet, it guaranteed it's not going to work. So I build pleasure into my life, like particularly with food, but also like my nightly ritual is like give myself a foot massage. It's like, I need that pleasure. I think we do need pleasure. It calms the nervous system. It's just a matter of not getting out of balance with it. But that's the challenge with everything is maintaining balance, right?
Or else, yeah, I mean, finding balance or finding your, it's the greatest version of yourself where it becomes non-negotiable. Because we all sort of saying, it's how many of us saying, well, I don't want to be this and don't want to be that. It's like, yeah, you told me 50 things you don't want to be. Well, what do you want to be, right?
What do you want to be? That's beautiful. Yeah.
It's
well, so I have a thing, I call them my pleasure disciplines. Like that is, and it's what you just said. It's like when it becomes non-negotiable, like at night, one of my big issues was always nighttime eating. I brush my teeth after dinner. It's like, once my teeth are brushed, that's that. And I went to a friend's house once and they were finishing dinner and they're like having dessert and she goes, "Do you want some dessert?" And I said, "No, I already brushed my teeth." And she looks at me like, "What does that have to do with it?" But for me, it's like, that's the hard stop. It serves me very well to know where the hard stop is. I think people negotiate with themselves way too much because that negotiating is where things get waffly. And they say the more choices you have, the harder it is to make a decision.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're speaking to. It's like, where is it non-negotiable? And what's the no matter what?
Yeah.
Like, what is the thing when my father was dying in 1980, he died in 86, and I was in the martial arts at that time. And he was always like, "I'm just concerned about you because you start things and you never finish them." And I promised him on his deathbed, I said, "Daddy, I'm going to get my black belt no matter what." And it was like, I had this firm, this is gonna happen. Period, full stop. Now, I broke my neck shortly thereafter and was in a halo traction device for 5 months. But I did get my black belt. I went back after the neurologist said, "You'll never train again." And I was like, "You don't know who you're talking to, do you?" So there are those things that we bring this fierceness to. And it certainly raising children is one of them. Like what a commitment, what a conviction that is, that you're going to take care of these kids no matter what. That's where the fierceness comes out. They talk about the mama bear and papa bear, like these are my little ones. And the instinct to protect them is so strong. Not that I've ever felt it, but I'm sure as a dad, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Tell me, I mean, do you feel like, have you maxed out your capabilities, or where are you sitting in terms of what you can do, what you will do, what you should do?
That's a provocative question. I would say no. Sometimes I feel like I'm just coming into my prime. There's something about publishing this book after writing so many books for other people with their names on them. Also, I got my license to practice psychotherapy back in the 90s. So 20 years ago, I was licensed. And I didn't feel like I could do it. I didn't want to sit there, and I didn't feel like I had enough to offer. Now in my 60s, I have a lot to offer. So I think I'm just coming into it. I don't think I'll ever retire. Someone said that to me the other day. They're like, you're never going to retire. And I'm like, yeah, I don't even think of retirement. A lot of people my age have already retired, or that's what they're focused on. And I never worked for a corporation. I think in the last 20 years, I was on a payroll, maybe for 2 years the whole time. So I've always worked for myself. I don't really think about retiring. I do think about being less busy, having less, particularly with publishing the book. I did a crowdfunding campaign. I wrote it. It was final edits. It was just over a year ago that I made a commitment to make it happen.
Wow.
I read it over 4th of July weekend in 2020. It had been on the back burner for 2 solid years. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, I hadn't looked at it in a while. So when I looked at it and read it, I was, oh, this has to get done. So I gave up on traditional publishing and just went ahead and did it myself. So I had to learn how to publish a book. I ran an Indiegogo campaign, did all the production, all of everything, created the marketing and the email list and all that kind of stuff. I would wake up like overwhelmed with a to-do list that I couldn't get a handle on, but it's getting easier now. I've got kind of the flow on the business end of things. So.
Do you need to be structured like that? Do you work well to timescales and timelines, or?
I always say deadlines make it happen in my world, and accountability is really, I have clients that I meet with once a week. I'm only really doing one book project at the moment and a couple other little things. But if I'm working on a book with a client, I require a once a week, and it's as much for them as for me. Like if there's a meeting that I need to show up for prepared, I'll show up prepared. I'm not about to come without doing what I said I was going to do. So yeah, that kind of structure. I don't do well with to-do lists. I can't keep up with them. It's like, it's like another thing to do to manage the to-do list. So I unfortunately fly by the seat of my pants a lot. And it's like, okay, what has to get done today? The one thing I do is like, okay, what is my top priority today? Like, what are my top 3 priorities? If I get the top thing that has, like today, it's you. And there's another podcast I'm on at 4:00. Those are the absolute must-dos, non-negotiable. But every single day, a bunch of stuff shows up that I hadn't expected. I'm sure you know what that's like. It's like, okay, well, that just took me an hour and a half and I hadn't even put it on the list. So I put things on the list after the fact, just so I can have the satisfaction of crossing them off. I learned that from my 90-year-old mother. I'm like, wait, Mom, that wasn't on your list this morning. She said, yeah, but I did it. So she puts it on the list.
Taking credit.
I'm like, that's a good one. I like that.
That's right in your to-do list at 9:00 at night as the day's over. It's like, yeah.
Yes.
It's always going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
No, it's great principles to have like that. How would you describe your writings and your, really, I suppose, how many books have you dealt with? Do you have any concept?
I think I've written from scratch 8 books, and I've edited for everything from like final edits to complete developmental edits, probably another 15 or 20.
God, I'm in awe. I can barely read my own book. It's an absolute skill to have that focus and concentration, I think.
It is. I do it in bite-sized pieces. It's rare. Sometimes I'll sit for hours at a time and work on something, but it's more like I give myself a 2-hour window and I make sure I stand up after 50 minutes and stretch or go get a drink or something. Like, it's not good actually to sit for more than 50 minutes at a time. But I'm good at bite-sized pieces. So I think it's just what I do professionally. It's, for me, it's my profession. It's my job. I do it because I get paid to do it. It's not necessarily my favorite thing in the world. I am am pivoting in my career from actually being a ghostwriter and editor to being a writing coach. The author's chrysalis is really so that I can step back, not be doing so much of the writing, but do more of the advising and inspiring and conversation and teaching people what it takes to write well, and then giving them a structure. There's something about a group that really, the collaboration is very powerful. So between that, you know, for me, it's really about, okay, I've done that for 20 years. I'm good at it. Now, how can I help other people get good at it rather than doing it for them? You know, it's that old, I'd rather teach you how to fish than hand you a trout kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
it makes sense. It does make sense. Well, I suppose when you work in those group scenarios, you get everyone can go at their own speed, but as you say, you get the combined collective intuition, energy, power, whatever, you know, whatever comes together. It makes sense.
yeah, I love that. I think it's what's her name? Angel Arian or something talks about the flying geese and how they fly in formation.
In V formation, yeah, and they take turns.
Yeah, and so there's this updraft with all of them, and then the leader changes. You know, one of them's leading and then gives it over to another one. And I mean, there is something very beautiful about that collective, that camaraderie, and working together. So, in a non-competitive way.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, competition is good in some way. There's not to say competition isn't a good thing, but there cutthroat competition, not such a good thing.
Tell me what you mentioned there. It's, you know, what is it you love to do?
Well, I used to absolutely love to play Frisbee, especially if there's music. And I've been an ecstatic dancer. Me and my group, my core, we pioneered ecstatic dance when I was in my 20s and 30s. We didn't call it ecstatic dance. Now it's called ecstatic dance. Back then it was just called barefoot dancing or freestyle dancing.
Okay.
And
because I was going to say, I don't even know what ecstatic dancing is.
Oh my God. I discovered it. You know, I was at the time going to discos and, you know, wearing high heels and dancing, you know, and having a cocktail in between. And then one day I was in Berkeley and I walked into this event called Dance Jam. And it's just a DJ and a wide open dance floor and people just moving with the music. And there's there's none of that self-consciousness that happens on the dance floor because people are literally just letting themselves be completely free. And at this point, it's this massive movement. It's all over the world. And it's known as ecstatic dance. Wow. Back then it was barefoot dancing. And there was two or three of them in the Bay Area. There was one in Berkeley, Dance Jam. There was Barefoot Boogie in San Francisco. That was blast. And then we had Dance Spirit in Marin County. So you could dance 3 nights a week. Now you can dance 3 times a day. There are so many ecstatic dances and it's not a class. I mean, there are classes, there's 5 rhythms and those different things, but in general, it's just an open floor. People show up in their sweat clothes or their yoga outfits or whatever, and just go wild. It's absolutely the most fun I have ever had. And now that I have destroyed my knees, I don't go nearly as often, but you know, music and dance is last night when I was making dinner, I turned on the music and I'm dancing around while I chop the vegetables. And so really music and dance is my greatest joy in life.
That's your thing, just feeling the vibe and just going along with it.
Yeah, just letting go of the mind and feeling my way into the body and letting the body do what it wants. I mean, there is a dance tonight that I might go to. They're doing outdoor dances now. COVID really shut that whole thing down. And some people were doing, on Zoom, and I tried that a couple of times and I was like, it just doesn't have the same effect to stand in front of a Zoom window and dance, okay, good idea, but it got boring very quickly. When I first used to do it, it was so much fun because it was like, we'd be rolling around on the ground. It's like getting back into your child's mind. We'd just be jumping around and rolling and these were pretty athletic people that had a lot of skill in their bodies. My martial arts training served me well because I have this, people often ask me if I have dance training and I'm like, no, I have martial arts training. but it can just be so much fun to have that. And then there's contact improv, which is a whole nother thing. I didn't get too much into contact improv just because of my neck situation. I did have cervical spine fusion, and that's a little too rowdy for me. That's like crossing the line into dangerous. So I just preferred the other, and I've been to Burning Man a couple of times. So all of this is very Northern California culture. It's a big part of the culture here. That's
awesome. I mean, you sort of feeling into yourself, I suppose, and letting your true self come out as such.
Yeah, it's more like getting in touch with the instinctive self and the playful side. I think that's the beauty of it. It's so very playful, and the relationships you form there are just beautiful. I have a housemate. I live in this big 6,000 square foot house. This is not a virtual background. This is actually the front window. I mean, the house is ginormous, and there's anywhere between 7 and 10 people that live here. And one of my housemates has just kind of stumbled into this dance community in the last year. And it's why he moved to Marin from San Francisco, because it's like an immediate tribal scene. It's just everybody getting together several times a week and smiling and dancing and moving. And there's a lot of flirtation going on. It's really quite yummy. So
there's a bit of a sensual side to you, is there? Is that a fair thing?
To me?
Yeah.
You think? Yeah, I've always had very much so. I was the first book I published it was an anthology. I did a series of anthologies back in the early 2000s, which is how I got into the publishing world. At that point, I was a yoga teacher and massage therapist. But I did a book called The Marriage of Sex and Spirit. That was really my desire it's the intersection of sexuality and spirituality. And I've done a lot of books in that arena. The Taoist priest I referenced earlier, Bruce Francis, I was his editor on a book called Taoist Sex Meditation. So it was a big part of my identity for many years. I have never talked about this on a podcast, but I'll share it with you since, as you said, we go deep. Wow, I'm not sure I want to talk about this now that I've brought it up.
That's okay.
Let's just say I had a health crisis that changed that entirely for me. So between menopause and this particular health problem, my sexuality became not the dominant force in my psyche. And I miss my precious estrogen. I miss it like crazy, but I do not miss that monkey on my back. It's not the driving. It's just not the way it used to be. I used to be a horny wench. I'm not kidding. Like it really was the driving force in my world, and it's not anymore. And that's a relief. I think I'm still very much in touch of my sensual side, but my sexuality isn't front and center like it used to be. When I was in my 50s, people would say, like, God, you're the sexiest 50-year-old I've ever met. And I was very proud of that. They don't say that about me in my 60s. Maybe, but I would have to cultivate it actively. I have friends who are on the Wiley protocol and take all these hormones to make sure that everything is still cooking along the way it did when we were in our 30s and 40s. Frankly, I'm not interested. I'm fine with that part of my life has given way to something else. And I actually think that there is something very beautiful about reconceiving, and I don't like the phrase recreate, but somehow being born into a different phase of life where sensuality and sexuality actually morphs and changes as your body morphs and changes. I haven't been in a relationship in many years now, but I have a sense it's coming. I can kind of feel it on the horizon. And I know I'm going to have to, it's going to be like starting all over. Like, what is it like now? What turns me on now? Because I don't have that driving force of the estrogen and testosterone. I mean, even women have testosterone.
Mm.
And my testosterone levels are pretty low, which doesn't mean I don't still enjoy sensual pleasure. It's just not driven by testosterone so much as it is, just a really like delighting in the pleasure of physical touch. So anyway.
Is there a connection to that and to writing? It's a form of creativity. It's a form of expression too, right? And it's unique and beautiful in its own way. It's interpretive.
Well, it's all life force. So, in yoga, they talk about Shakti. It's all the Shakti. It's the movement of the feminine energy, the feminine divine, if you want. It's like that's the creative pulse. Whereas the masculine is this like center core, this like core, absolute, never changing, and so that's the whole yin and yang. It's like we all have to have some of both. I meditate in the morning because I need that anchoring into the core of the unchangeable, the untouchable aspect of the self, because everything else is swirling around me so fast that I need that centrifugal force. I think of it like it's the difference for me from being a top and being a gyroscope. So like you pump up a top and you let it go and it's spinning, 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 and it hits a wall and then it's dead. Whereas if it's a gyroscope, it hits the wall and it rights itself again. Because it knows where its center of gravity is. It knows how to find that true north. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. Possibly a slightly weird question. Do you like yourself? Do you love yourself?
95% of the time. I mean, I have my moments. I have my moments where I'm like just over it and done, but I know that voice. I know that that's a part, I do parts work. So it's like we all have, I always like the metaphor of the perfect diamond. A perfect diamond has 57 facets. And I think the average human being has at least that many. and different facets come forward, whoever you're interacting with or what circumstance you're in, different facets will come forward. So sometimes my self-hating facet comes forward, not nearly as often as it used to. I've done a lot of personal healing, a lot of depth psychology, a lot of, finding my own blind spots, which I think is the most important thing for people who are suffering in their relationships. But I don't think I'll ever be fully baked, but the bread has risen. It's, it's not gooey and mushy anymore. I'm pretty strong. I'm pretty strong in myself and I like who I've become. And this book, I mean, I'm going to get choked up now, but what you were talking about earlier about in your sleep, it's like, this is a legacy. When I leave, my name will still be here. Jean's name, people know her and still talk about her, and she had a huge impact on people's lives. And I'm having an impact on people's lives. So I'm not going to be like 6 foot under and nobody ever thinks about Geralyn again. That's not why I set out to write the book. But it's an effect it has. And it's why I was so determined to write a really good book. Yeah, so God, I got choked up. That's the first time that's happened on a podcast. You told me you like to go deep, so you do ask some provocative questions.
I do have a habit of making people cry. I mean, I say it's not me. They cry in my presence. I can't take credit. Sure. You mentioned there about the Eckhart Tolle almost doing the positive body. Do you think, is there something in that for you?
I mean, I think it's a metaphor. I think so if you look at it from the Taoist perspective and framework, we have 7 bodies. There's the physical body, there's the chi body, mental, emotional, psychic, karmic, Tao. So there are these other, so it's really it's more a metaphor than a reality. But I do think that we know enough about the the neurology of pleasure, the pleasure
Mm.
circuits, the reward circuits, the motivational circuits. We know enough about that to be able to call that the pleasure body. And then you weave that in with the instinct and even bacteria seek pleasure. There's like, we go toward what satisfies our needs. And I think the confusion comes in between what are the immediate needs and the long-term, the short-term versus long-term satisfactions.
Mm.
And I think that's the hardest thing. I certainly had difficulties with impulse control, still do when it's, like when I haven't brushed my teeth and it's late at night and there's ice cream in the freezer. I mean, I won't say I never eat anything after I've brushed my teeth. I'm just going to say that it's like, that's the stopping point most of the time. And to this issue of, do I like myself? If I break the rules, I don't beat myself up about it.
Mm.
It's like, okay, rules are made to be broken on occasion, just not every day or every night, unless I want to, not fit into my jeans, which is not okay with me.
Ecstatic dancing in sort of jogging pants to try and fit into the jeans. I like it.
Yeah. Well, I've destroyed my knees. It's unfortunate that the body breaks down. I have gotten permission to get a knee replacement. I'm just not ready to go under the knife, but one of these days I will. I talk to a lot of people who've had knee replacements and they're like, I wish I did it sooner. And then I talk to other people who are like, God, that was horrible. So it's anybody's guess. I kind of pray for guidance on those things. And when it gets painful enough, maybe I'll do it.
What life principles do you live by? I mean, are you someone that likes to try things at least once? It's whether it's knees or God knows what.
Well, I have jumped out of airplanes. I have tried a lot of things once. I don't know that I live with that as a principle. I think if I have any, there's this whole thing about what's your purpose in life. And I struggled with that for a long time, framed it and reframed it. And then when I landed on what I now consider my purpose in life, I stuck with it. And it's that my purpose is to do as much good and have as much fun as humanly possible. Actually, the reverse. It's to have as much fun and do as much good as humanly possible in that order. So if there is anything that I would say is my guiding principle, it's like, let's make it fun. Let's find the fun in it. And that is somewhat influenced by the book, that story I read you. There's other ones like that are like, oh my God. There's a really powerful one in here about men and how much men are conditioned not to show feelings. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I know about, so that's one of my principles is trust your feelings. Like they are telling you something. There's no such thing as a negative feeling. There are negative emotions, and I make a distinction between feelings, emotions, and moods. So feelings come and go. They're like weather patterns. Mm-hmm. It's raining 1 minute, the rainbows and the clouds are breaking the next. So feelings come and go. That's the nature of them. Now, when we name them and identify with them, I'm angry. Now we have an emotion because we've named it. We've objectified it and it's ours rather than it having us, it moving through us. We suddenly have our anger and we have reasons for it and we're justified in our anger. So, and then if you hold on to an emotion long enough, you get a mood. And, moods can last for days. And and then you've got a mood disorder or you've got it, so there is really something for me about trusting my feelings. I do my best not to deny or repress my feelings. Sometimes I have to negotiate with myself when and where to express them. And when they're like information for me and when they're information for others, and to respect that others also have feelings and there are times to share the information and there are times for not. That's all comes with maturity. I did not have that kind of maturity in my 30s and 40s. My emotional intensity pushed a lot of people out of my life. So fortunately, my family put up with me. They do love me. I have a really good relationship with my family, which is not, I don't think it's the norm. I think, maybe it should be the norm, but I have a really, really good relationship with my family members. My friends are often like, wow, you have a really good relationship with your family.
Mm.
And that's something I've cultivated, because I was the difficult one. Fortunately, all my brothers had children, and now there are plenty of nieces and nephews that are the difficult ones. So I'm off the hook.
You're praying for them, it's like, yeah, just wait till they're doing something pretty rash.
Well, I do end up being the family therapist. I come in and I'm the voice of reason, and I'm the one that like validates everybody's feelings. And I had to talk through my mom through something last night. And then I was on the phone with this brother and that brother and this niece, trying to get everybody on the same page. So, it's my mom's 90th birthday was the day after Christmas last year. So she's been 90. And so we're finally having the birthday party this weekend. So there's it's like a family reunion, and there's all kinds of stuff going on about that, particularly with COVID. So there were some ruffled feathers yesterday that I did my best to smooth out, and I'm still going to have to deal with some of it today, but I do get to be the voice of reason sometimes, because I have three very, very, very righteous, very intelligent, very successful brothers who know it all, and I'm like, okay, well, let's look at this from some other perspectives and help everybody get on the same page. This really is about mom. It's not about your politics or your, so it's an interesting thing that I'm in the middle of right now.
Which is more fun? That it's almost like the arsonist or the firefighter. Is it being the chaperone or being the mischief maker?
For me personally,
yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's all of it. I think it's the full round. I do enjoy the respect I get when I'm the firefighter. I could feel it yesterday. I could feel my mother went from being very upset to laughing in the course of a half-hour conversation. I kind of, it was almost like a role reversal. She used to have to work me through it when I was really upset, and I really helped her yesterday. That was a very, very satisfying feeling. So, and that has a lot to do with the fact that I lived with her for a year, because we got to know each other so much better and trust each other. And yeah, I have a very, very different relationship with my mom now. I feel so very blessed. I'm going to have to write a COVID memoir about my relationship with my mom.
Yeah. No, it's sweet. It's, as you say, to have the wisdom maybe to actually take that opportunity and to make it something, as opposed to I have to. It's like, no, I get to, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Tim, I think we probably already know, but what's a guilty pleasure for you?
Chocolate. Let's see, what's a guilty pleasure for me? Well, most of my guilty pleasures are around food.
Okay, give us your last meal then. What are we getting? Starters,
Oh,
mains,
well, last night it wasn't that interesting. Actually, it was delicious though. I made myself last night. What did I have?
No, your last supper. So the last meal you would ever have. What would you go for?
Oh God, I would just go to
a buffet.
It's funny. I would go to an ice cream store and have a sample of everything. There's this ice cream store. One of my favorites is Screamy Mimi's. It's like, can I just have a little one of the baby scoops of this, and this, ice cream would be my last meal, I think.
Wow. Starters, mains, and dessert?
Yeah, skip the salad.
It's like none of that green stuff.
Well, if it's pesto, I do like pesto. I'm not wild about pasta. For me, pasta is like a pesto delivery vehicle. Just give me the pesto. I'll dip a cucumber in it.
My kids feel that way about butter. It's like, the pasta just brings the butter to them.
Right.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. No, it's great to have it. Leisure and pleasure for you then? What does it look like?
I go out in nature a lot. I lay out in the sun. You can tell from my skin that I love to just stretch out in the sun. I go for long walks on the beach when I'm in Ventura. I go for walks in the woods when I'm here in Northern California. I go to bed early. I do love going to bed early. I wear my glompers. Oh, somebody's just walking in. Hi. I wear my glompers a lot. I'll put on my music. When I was cooking dinner last night, I just love to have it in my totally in my head, especially when I'm walking around and just enjoying that. So what else? I actually enjoy cooking, and I enjoy going to the farmer's market on the weekends, wandering around. It's like a social event. So those are some of my pleasures.
Wow. What's something that not many people know about you?
Oh God. I'm pretty much an open book. A lot of people don't know about my martial arts background, because that was a long time ago now. Wow, that's a good one. I don't know. I don't know if I can come up with anything.
And many, many, many years from now, what's going to get written on your headstone?
Oh God, she had a good time.
She needed new knees.
Right. She wore out her knees. She got a lot of mileage out of that body.
Arsonist firefighter, knees worn out. Oh, I love it. Tell me, if you were describing your fire in the belly then in one or two words, what would they be?
Hot. Just one word, hot. I do run hot. Like I sleep. So no matter what time of year it is, I have a very thin down comforter with a bamboo cover over it. And I like to get into a cold bed. I know enough about sleep. I wrote a book on sleep for a client, and I studied the science of sleep.
Wow.
And my ex, Bob, he used to sleep with an electric blanket. I sleep with a cold blanket, like literally it's a twin sized, it's not even a full comforter. It's a twin size comforter. And the reason I do that is because I can lift it up and flip it over and have the cold side on my body. And I'll roll over in the bed onto the cold side of the sheets, because cold actually helps it's your temperature dropping is what puts you to sleep. People don't know that. So there is something about, I don't even remember the question. I've completely lost my train of thought, but yeah, something about what would be on my headstone. I'm not sure how I got to the cold bed from the headstone, but there you go.
I was asking about your fire in your belly. If you were to summarize it, it's hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be more.
No, I run hot. That's where that's the segue. People are always like, your hands are so warm. I tend to run hot.
Cool. Like it. So tell us, where can people track you down, hunt you down, follow you, find you?
So the book is available on Amazon in all formats. You can get the Kindle, hardcover or softcover. My website, GeralynGendreau.com, has all the information about the different things that I do. I'm on Facebook. I'm trying to get onto Instagram. I'm actually going to see my niece, who's an Instagram fiend, and have her teach me a few things this weekend. I am pretty easy to find. Just Google me. You'll see some of the books I've written, and GeralynGendreau.com. You can get there's any number of free things on there. I do a self-assessment about the blind spot work. I have 3 pro tips to finally finish your book. You can sign up for any and all of that. If you go to junglegene.com, you get I read chapter 1 in a mini audiobook. And the producer of that is actually, he just agreed yesterday to help me do the audiobook. So hopefully it'll be on Audible in 6 months to a year from now. It takes a while to produce those things, as you know very well. But so mostly I would say read this book. It'll change your life. Jean's work changed mine. I've already got people going, oh my God, I can't look at the world the same having read this. So it's really a game changer in terms of understanding what we are and what we can be. It's, we're so far from the continuum and so far away from optimal human being. That's a lot of what her work was about, is what does it take to optimize human nature?
Wow.
So
powerful, isn't it? What you get to be and what you can be. So powerful. So tell us, what's the final message you'd like to leave with the listeners?
Have fun. Make it joyful. Joy is your natural state. And if you slow down long enough, whether it's a meditation practice, I love the Wheel of Awareness. Dan Siegel's work is very helpful for those of us who didn't have an integrated brain, who didn't have optimal conditions in infancy and childhood. That can be repaired, and you can have a more functional nervous system. And Dr. Dan Siegel's work is really very powerful. I've trained with him now, and just don't give up the fight.
Beautiful.
It's worth. I went through some suicidal depression a number of years ago, like severe clinical depression, and I'm on the other side of it. And there's miracles hiding behind every seeming disaster. There's something behind it that couldn't happen if it weren't for the disaster. I think 10 years from now, we're going to look back at COVID and go, oh my God, the changes that came about in society as a result of that. Change comes when there's intense pressure, and we are in a pressure cooker right now. So I say, don't give up and have fun, or get back to the fun as soon as you can.
Something about that, isn't it? Your darkest hour can be your brightest moment. You know, it can be a connection if you just let yourself go there, see the dark side.
Yeah.
Powerful. Geralyn, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you. It's been fun. And listen, awesome. Congratulations on the book. And I look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Yes, you're so welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.